In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you a perfect example of the type of claim that clogs up the system. And this is a decision. I'm going to share with you two different things. So stick with me here. One is the example, and two, what should have been done in this particular case, right? So stick around and watch these two examples, or the one example of a type of claim that gets clogged, that clogs up the system for veterans who have real legitimate claims, right? I know that there are veterans out there who often share how long they've been waiting for a decision, the whole process for a decision. And although the VA does like to get or try to get claims processed, there still are a lot of claims that clog up the system. And this is a perfect example of one of those. So I'm going to be sharing that. And also, if by any chance you are in this situation where the claim is chronic rhinitis, okay, and going into what should have been done or what can be done in this type of situation. All right, so let's get right into it. All right, so here is the claim, and you'll notice that it is, right, it's a recent decision, okay? And another thing to be mindful of is that this is a previous denial. So this was submitted, and this is a denial, right, that it is confirmed and continued, and it was for allergic rhinitis. All right, so this was a previous denial for allergic rhinitis, and they are confirming and continuing their decision. Now, what happened was, let me give you a little bit of backstory, right? Stick with me. I want to give you some details, all right? I know some people say my videos are long, but I want to give you details, right, that you have to have in order to understand what's going on. This veteran came to me after he had been working with one of those companies, right? In fact, it's an ex-employee of one of those companies where they want a certain percentage of whatever they get you awarded for, right? So he was told after he was, given the approval for sleep apnea, this person who had worked for years for this type of company told him to submit for chronic rhinitis. All right. Now, let me share this. He did, and I may go over this or I may repeat this, but I want you to know also that this veteran did not submit any additional information, meaning a supplemental claim can receive new and relevant information. And this point is going to be very important here soon. So let's continue. So here, right, he's in the Army, and here is the most important, is the reason for the decision, right? The previous denial, remember I mentioned this is a denial after a denial. The previous denial of service connection for allergic rhinitis is confirmed and continued. Now you will see or notice that here it states, right, that a supplemental claim is to identify new and relevant information, right? That's what a supplemental claim is. It's a claim was denied, and it's basically saying, hey, it was denied. Okay, wait a second. Here is some new information. For example, I know a veteran who has submitted for radiculopathy secondary to lower lumbar spine. He wanted to receive he was submitting a claim for bilateral radiculopathy in his legs. Now, during the time period that he was waiting for a decision, he happened to have the opportunity to get MRIs of his lower back, for his lower back Okay, not for radiculopathy or not to show for the radiculopathy. It was specifically for the lower back. When he received those results, it showed touching of a nerve, right? Touching of a nerve in the lower back. Don't know the technical term of it, but that's what was happening. After radiculopathy was approved at 10%, this veteran reapplied a supplemental claim indicating that it should have been a higher rated based off of the new or based off of the MRI, and the veteran ended up getting approved for a higher rating for radiculopathy based off of an MRI scan that was done while the claim had already been submitted. Okay. Once again, there's many different situations. This happens to be that example for that veteran. There could have been other examples where perhaps the veteran, before a decision was made, could have submitted those MRIs while there was that time period of that the VA was still reviewing the claim. All right, that's another example, because I'm certain someone's going to correct me on that it could have been submitted at that time, which is true. So you'll also notice that the veteran did not show up for the comp and pen exam. Now, here's the thing. The veteran state he did not receive any kind of notification, did not receive a phone call, did not receive a text, did not receive an email or a physical documentation. That is what should be done. Now, as you know, my only guess, right, because I showed you that this was a recent, on the 23rd of October, right, that this decision was made. And I'm just guessing here, was the result of the government shutdown. I don't know. If I had to make a guess, I think partly it was someone just didn't send out the notification, something wasn't mailed, something. I'm thinking somehow, some way it was a result of, in part, of the government shutdown. I don't know. It's just a guess, right? Now, here's an additional information where it says a grant of service connection. Now, here's the thing. This was not a secondary claim. This was a primary claim, which in fact was, which it could have been a direct, right? It could be direct. However, this also perhaps could have been secondary to, or in fact, secondary to sleep apnea. However, this could also be, sleep apnea could be secondary to chronic rhinitis. Now, here's the thing about that I want to share with this particular claim is that he was, and remember, as I mentioned before, this person was encouraged to submit this claim by someone who had previously worked for a company that they're the ones who want a certain percentage of whatever they get you awarded, right? So this veteran was never diagnosed. Never diagnosed. So this example here is a veteran who was never diagnosed and doesn't have any medical records for chronic rhinitis. Now, there is one thing that the veteran has in his records, but he doesn't have a current diagnosis, which you will see, right? If he's claiming this as a primary claim, look at this. Medical evidence of a current disability. So these are the types of claims that clog up the system. This person who worked for one of these percentage companies, you know, they take a percentage, told this veteran, submit for this claim. When in fact, this veteran had no diagnosis. This veteran had no business submitting this claim. This is a perfect example of a claim that was submitted by someone who worked for years for a company that puts in or helps veterans with their disability claims and for a percentage of their claim of what they're awarded, had this veteran. And so this veteran is saying, hey, what happened? He's coming to me saying, what happened? And I'm going to share with you what I would have done differently in this claim. Now, continuing on. Let's continue. Here you will see, right? There's no documentation, right? Now, here you will see, and this is where a lot of veterans get frustrated because they look at the favorable findings. And the VA states, the evidence shows that a qualifying event, injury, or disease had its onset during your service. Your service records show you were seen for rhinitis during service. Now, I want to share something with you veterans, because they'll look at these favorable findings and they're like, what the hell? They are specifically saying there is a record of an event, right? Which it says in the documents, in the regulations, right? If we go back in the regulations, it states, and a lot of you veterans know this, right? Where it says evidence of an occurrence or aggravation of a disease or injury in active duty service. So which is one of the three, right? The medical evidence, the injury or aggravation in service, and then the nexus, right? So veterans come back and they're like, the VA are idiots, right? The VA are idiots. Now, because of this, they'll put in something like this in a decision letter. Now, here's the thing, veterans. Here's the reason why, and I'm going to explain. This is part one. Stick with me here, right? This is part one. I'm going to share with you part two. Here's this, veterans. You and every veteran went to sick call for something during your 4 years of duty or more. Let's say, for example, at one point, it's more than likely in a 4-year period, you more than likely went to the VA for diarrhea, headaches, or something, right? Let's say, for example, you went you have medical records saying that you had the shits and you went to the VA and you were treated for the shits. You were treated for diarrhea. They gave you medication and you went about your life. You went about your life. You don't have any other issues with diarrhea. It was something you ate, something happened, you had diarrhea. Now, several years later, hey, I'm going to put in for IBS diarrhea. And what happens is there are no records of IBS. Now, I'm using an example that I know is presumptive, intestinal issues, but I'm just using this as an example. We can say any other thing. Let's say, for example, right? Diabetes, IBS, right? Then there's no more other records. You've been a civilian for 10 or so many years, and now you want to put in for IBS, right? The thing that veterans, as veterans, have to realize is that just because you went to you went to the clinic as a veteran doesn't mean that that the service caused you to have X disease or X injury, right? Especially when, let's say, for example, you had the shits, you got treated for, then there's nothing else. No other continuation, no nothing. Even as a civilian, nothing. No medical records, no complications, no nothing. And then veterans want to put in for X disease. So let's say, for example, veterans go for any and every and all things while they're in the service, and then they get out and they're civilians. They have jobs. They're exposed to toxins. They're exposed to a number of different things that it had nothing to do with the military service. So I get it, right? I'm a veteran too, and I hear, a lot of people, they may not like what I'm saying, but we have to, that's the issue where a lot of veterans are just throwing stuff at the VA, and then they complain about the VA, and then they complain about VSOs. When VSOs see this stuff and they're like, I'm not going to answer your call. I'm not going to answer your emails. And then veterans continue to watch every other video or every video about a certain cause or a certain, they want, to get compensation for something when they don't even have any medical records. And then they meet people like this guy who told them to just submit something, and then clogs up the system for veterans who have real legitimate claims. And real legitimate claims, there's no issues, right? But I understand we're not taught this stuff, right? And there's nothing wrong with watching videos, but this is a perfect example. And what I'm sharing with you is that these are the types of claims that clog up the system. So here's what I would have done differently. So let me share with you what I would have done differently. First and foremost, right, this is a supplemental claim. So first off, if this veteran wants to put in for chronic rhinitis, he first off has to have a diagnosis. He needs to go to an ENT doctor and get a diagnosis. So he fulfills the first one, because remember in the documents, the favorable setting saying, hey, there is an event in your records that said you had rhinitis. Perfect. That is strong, but he needs a current diagnosis. So if you're in this situation and the veteran, what I would have done is had him go and see an ENT doctor and get a diagnosis. Second of all, he has been with his wife for 7-8 years, around that. That's 8 years of personal witness testimony that she can write a letter that I have known ex-veteran since this date. I have seen him have to take medication, clogged nose, different issues, a witness. There's 8 years, even though there might not be medical diagnosis for those 8 years, that's information right there and then. Third, I would have had either a parent, a brother, a friend who has known him since childhood, right? State, I do not recall, no one in our family has chronic rhinitis. Ex-veteran has not had did not have any issues with chronic rhinitis growing up at all. There was no issues. This would have helped in the timeline to show when the veteran did not have any issues and then began to have issues, and connect the dots to show when the event happened and the continuation. A parent can say, after he came back home, after he returned home from the service, I noticed that he was constantly blowing his nose, constantly running nose. We would see him at family events, some sort of statement that this was happening after service. Back to those two, I would also have the statement from his wife and the statement from a parent, a brother, or a good friend that he's known for a very long time and knew and saw him after. All those need to be notarized, right? Notarized. Because think about this. A veteran can write a statement and sign it and pretend to be somebody. And I think sometimes they kind of take that in consideration. I don't know. But a notarized letter has that more power for the VA to recognize that information as coming from that person. Because when a paper is notarized, right, they verify the identity of the person who's signing a statement, a legal statement that if they were called into court or deposition or something, they would certify that what they wrote was true, and real, right? So have those documentation or those letters notarized. And for the veteran to write a personal statement, about his experience, and it being consistent with what everybody has stated, what his brother or what his wife has stated, what his parent has stated, a sibling has stated, a friend has stated. All that needs to be consistent. It's not where the veteran, or it wouldn't be good for the veteran to say, oh, I've been suffering, every day, or I have to take medication every day. And the wife states, oh, he takes medication once a week. All right. I see him, have, these issues, once a month. That's not going to help, right? Everything's got to be consistent, right? So getting that diagnosis, getting a personal statement, lay statement from his wife, getting statements from people who knew him before the military, who can state, I played sports with this guy. I never saw him have any issues with his nose or anything like that. Okay. Have those notarized. Then the veteran submit a personal written statement from a written statement himself, right? Those things would be new and relevant information. The ENT doctor, right? And here's one thing you can do if you're going to get a diagnosis is, if you really have chronic diagnosis, you can state the information already to the doctor, so that when you go to the doctor, right, I would, in this case, ask the doctor, what's my diagnosis? Get a diagnosis. And two, in your medical opinion, how long would you say, from, just from what you have seen here today, that you could guesstimate that I have been having these issues? If there is even a possibility, right? I'm just stating the kind of question that I would ask the doctor if I were to go, excuse me, is there a way to know, or what would be your medical professional opinion about how long that I've been dealing with this? That's going to be helpful. I personally would have a letter already written, a nexus letter already written for the doctor, where there is information about what the parent said, what the wife said, and what the veteran has said, and just have a little bit more information, where the doctor can say, more than likely than not, the veteran has this issue due to his military service and exposures, toxic exposures, perhaps, whatever that might be, has caused him to have this chronic rhinitis. Then have that in a PDF file. And because you have this issue, right? If you legitimately have this issue, and you've gotten those letters from these other people that I would suggest, then you would be able to have a letter already written that you can, when you're speaking with the doctor, and the doctor will say, do you have any questions for me? And this is an opportunity to say, doctor, I have been having this issue for X amount of time. Look, I have written a letter. My wife of 8 years can tell you, my mother, my brother can tell you that I didn't have these issues. I have been suffering these issues since my deployments, since my military service. I have put together a PDF or a Word document. Would I be able to have you look over it and be willing to sign this letter just on what you've seen and what you've read? Is that something that you'd be willing to look at and to sign? He might say yes. He might say no. He might say, or he or she might say, yes, no, I'll have a look at it. And then be great. Have at it. Then follow up. Get the receptionist's information and remind her, hey, Dr. So-and-so is what's the email address that I need to send this document to, so that the Dr. So-and-so said they'll look at it and review it. Who can I send that? What's the email address for me to send that to? They'll give you the email address. You forward that information to them and then follow up. And they're either going to do it or they're not. Now, if they do it, there's your nexus letter. And that's going to be new and relevant information for a supplemental claim. Now, if they don't, no problem. You're still going to receive, and this is where there's a good chance of getting the nexus letter completed, because the doctor is going to give you a diagnosis. So then you're going to have the letter, the diagnosis, and then potentially the nexus letter, right? So follow up with those. And then, hey, after a supplemental claim, you have time to get this information. This is what I would have encouraged the veteran to do at the onset. Remember, this veteran submitted a claim, a direct service connection claim, without any of this. And he was told to do this by a company who normally, or he worked for this company, that they want a percentage of what they are able to get you awarded for, which was a complete waste of time of the veteran and of the VA, and time taken away from legitimate and real claims. All right, so let's get to part 2. If you're still with me, hey, come back and watch this later if you want, but now is part 2. In part 2, I'm going to be sharing more in depth of if this situation, more in depth about more of what this veteran can do in the next, which I really have shared, but I want to just go over this real quick with you. Get on to the second part of this video. If you would like a copy of the report that I'm about to share with you, click on the link below so that you can reference it in the future. It may not be something that you are currently dealing with now, but perhaps in the future, or if you just want to know or have some information that can help you or others win their claim in this particular situation, click on the link below. It'll give you access to the report that I'm about to share with you. All right, get access to that, and I'll see you in the next part. All right, so here is, let me get this bigger, right? So once again, I have mentioned that there was no diagnosis and there was no current or chronic disability. Now, here's the thing. Although treated in service, right, we were all treated for everything. I'm certain you can look at every veteran's medical records and know that we were treated at some point for the shits. We were treated at some point for headaches. We were treated for some pain and aches and pains, right? Now, although he was treated in service, there was no chronic residuals. Nothing continued. There are veterans who had the shits in the military and continue to have shits throughout and went several times throughout their time in the military, right? They have that as records. Now, here's the thing that I mentioned to you before. The things that we go to clinic for are temporary. They're temporary, right? Now, him having chronic or having rhinitis, right? It was temporary. Now, the VA looks for that continuity, right? Are you on medication? How long has this been going on, right? The current medical diagnosis, and there is no treatment, nothing. So they consider it resolved. So this is why veterans, if you're a veteran who has received a decision where in the favorable results, it says, yes, we have records of you complaining about this in your records. And they look at it like favorable. Why didn't they approve of me? Why didn't they approve me? More than likely, hey, there was no continuation. You have no diagnosis, current diagnosis. Remember this, look at this. No current diagnosis. And that years have passed with no treatment, right? So these are important things to know. Now, let's continue, right? So the strategy, you've got to get a current diagnosis. As I mentioned before, you've got to get a current diagnosis. If this is your issue, go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor and get a diagnosis, right? And then have the provider, and this is where that letter, that template letter comes in, right? The veteran's allergic rhinitis has been chronic since service with ongoing symptoms and treatment. Now that can be stated because the wife statement, right? The wife statement, and perhaps there could be some medical documentation, not all the time, but right? Look, I get it. As veterans, we're told to suck it up and drive on. I've served in two different military branches, the Marine Corps and the Army. Believe me, I know what it's like to try to go to sick call in both of those branches, right? We're told to suck it up, right? But when you become a civilian, right, you don't have to suck it up. You could go and get some medical treatment for it. But hey, your family, there's times where family members say, hey man, you got to go get checked. I can't tell you how many veterans have told me that the reason why they went to go get sleep apnea, checked for sleep apnea, checked for high blood pressure is because of their family, right? Get those lay statements. Let's move on. So there was no nexus, right? There was no nexus. Even if you had allergic rhinitis in service and still have it today, the VA requires a nexus opinion. A nexus opinion. That's why there's a CNP, also why there's a CNP exam. Now, the VA adjudicators may write something like, although you were treated for rhinitis in service, there's no evidence that your current condition is related to that episode. As I mentioned before, just because someone had the shits doesn't mean that 20 years later they have IBS because they had the shits back in the 90s, right? I mean, let's be real, veterans. Let's be serious about this, right? This is no laughing matter. This is something for real legitimate concerns or real legitimate diseases and injuries sustained through the military, right? This means the CMP examiner or rater concluded your current allergic rhinitis is not the same as the one in service, and then they believe your current rhinitis is due to post-service causes. Now, if you remember, the veteran did not go to their CMP exam. It wouldn't have made a difference. Why? I shouldn't have to say. If you know this process, you wouldn't have to say. I wouldn't have to say, but I'm going to give you the answer, but I wouldn't have to say. The reason it wouldn't matter is because there's no current diagnosis and there's no continuation. What was the veteran going to tell the CMP examiner? Nothing. Now, can the CMP examiner, and this is another topic, and we're already at 33 minutes, can the CMP examiner state, yes, the veteran has has rhinitis, right? Remember, chronic rhinitis. He or she could state, yes, the veteran has rhinitis. However, there are no documentation or continuation since his military service back in the 90s. You can personally have a medical issue, but it doesn't mean it was caused or aggravated by your military service. So veterans today are like, hey, the CMP doctor diagnosed me, and they're still denying me? Yes, and that's why, right? So let's continue. Counter, submit a nexus letter, which can be, in this case, and like I mentioned before, it can be from that new ENT doctor that is current And that is making the connection because you provided information to that ENT doctor. You wrote a brief letter that the doctor could just plug in his information and sign it. And the doctor is saying his wife stated that he has been suffering from this for the last 8 years. He's been out of the military for 9 years. His family has stated that he didn't have any issues like this whatsoever. And I would even provide those copies of those letters to the ENT doctor when you forward that template letter, that letter that you've already put this all together, right? So you need that. And in your letter, of course, it'll state something like this, right? Let's continue. Now, determined to be seasonal or environmental, right? We've had the sniffles. I remember one time I had I had like an asthma attack, or I had something. I couldn't breathe, and I had to have been something allergic to some of the grass or something. You know, that was the environmental. But it doesn't mean that I had it all the time, right? And here's the thing: it could be seasonal, temporary, right? Now, under 38 CFR 3.380, the VA is required to distinguish acute seasonal reactions from chronic allergic reactions. So it states here, seasonal and other acute allergic manifestations subsiding on the absence or removal of the allergen, right? If I get out of the grass, I can breathe. If I get out of Iraq, I can breathe, right? Get away from the diesel exhaust, get away from the helicopter exhaust, right? We don't want that, but generally regarded as acute diseases, right? So if I was exposed, or you were exposed, or someone was exposed and to that grass, let's say I'm in many different environments, and a veteran still has asthma, well, it's not seasonal or it's not environmental, it's all the time, right? So here it gives a denial language, although treated in service for rhinitis, all right? Get this, even a veteran, even though you were treated for migraines, even though you were treated for the shits, even though you were treated for a rash, right? The condition was due to a seasonal allergy and resolved after exposure ended, or medication, right? So let's continue, right? They're going to state, hey, this was just seasonal and this was just environmental, right? Of course, remember, I stated before, situation dictates. Are you an Iraq war veteran? Are you an Afghanistan war veteran? What was your MOS, right? We would look at a number of different things. Let's continue. How would you counter that? Well, remember the letter from the wife, right? The wife can state he's taking medication every day, right? This is not a temporary or seasonal thing. This can go back to the statement from family members who knew you before the military service, right? That's the counter strategy for that, as I mentioned. Let's keep going, right? So here, the examiner found no objective evidence or current disability. You got to have a current diagnosis. You got to have a current diagnosis, right? And here's, as I mentioned, what would happen on a CMP exam? No objective findings consistent with chronic allergic rhinitis on exam. There was no reason why this veteran should have submitted this claim at all. And this is a perfect example of a claim clogging up the system for real and legitimate claims, right? The exam took place. There were no symptoms. The examiner didn't review your medications prior ENT records. Like, that could be something that can potentially happen if there are medications and ENT records. Let's continue. Now, counter strategy, right? Example, you went to the ENT doctor, and perhaps maybe they were willing to fill out the DBQ, right? And in the supplemental claim, you can, or in the, before, you wouldn't have to request a new exam because you would have this information. You would have this information before even submitting the claim and not even dealing with a supplemental claim, right? Pre-existing conditions not aggravated by service. Now, this is the reason why you want to have a letter from someone, specifically a family member who knew you from infancy, who can state, This veteran never had any issues with his nose. He was an athlete. He played around in the dirt, in the grass, everything, right? Right. So pre-existing conditions, and they can state that if they go back to your MEPS, right? Do you remember MEPS? And you stated, yeah, I have allergies. They're going to take that in consideration, saying you had that before you entered the military service. We're not giving you, right? Now, they may concede pre-existence, but if they deny aggravation, that's a different thing, right? Now, here's the thing: evidence does not show the condition permanently worsened as a result of military service. And these are the regs. To win, you must show that symptoms increased in frequency or severity. So you may have that pre-existing condition where maybe you're taking medication once a month, but now you're taking it every day, right? So there can be a claim for aggravation. Okay, let's continue. Right, here's the thing: counter, increased frequency or treatment. You can state, yeah, he had allergic or he had rhinitis, but he only took medication once a month, maybe. Or yeah, but it's not like it is today. He is sniffling. He can't go without his inhaler or whatever it might be, right? So here's the thing: the veteran's pre-existing allergic rhinitis was aggravated beyond its natural progression by exposure to diesel exhaust, jet exhaust, petroleum, CLP, whatever that might be, those chemicals, right? We know from those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, my experience in Iraq, we had those dust storms. We were exposed to a lot of dust. And that dust, and I've kept records of what's in that dust, right? We were exposed to a lot of stuff, right? So, next. So here's the thing, right? The VA's reason for denial. Okay, condition not resolved but chronic, right? Here's the thing, here's the regulations: show ongoing treatment and continuous symptoms. That comes from a wife, a spouse. That comes from medical documentation. That comes from medications. Those sorts of things. There's no medical nexus. Get a nexus from in this case, an ear, nose, and throat doctor, right? Hey, it's going to show that from your spouse, from family, this is year round. These aren't temporary situations. He suffers from this and has been suffering it since his military service, right? Objective findings: submit a private ENT DBQ or ask for a re-exam, right? You can get exam. Remember, situation dictates. Have something. And this veteran already had something in his medical records, but there's got to be a continuation. There's got to be something in there. And I would go to an ENT doctor and get that nexus letter, right? So pre-existing, right? He had this before. They're going to say this. There's a potential denial. Look, when someone can have rhinitis, but there are certain levels. It eventually gets to chronic, right? Where is it? It gets to chronic all the time. Before, not so bad. Now, chronic. All right? So, if you've stuck with me this long and are watching this video, I appreciate it. I'm going to give you good, solid information so that you submit solid claims. Now, here's the thing. The M21-1, look at this. The M21 adjudication manual requires VA raters to not dismiss allergic rhinitis as congenital or acute without medical evidence, right? Consider lay evidence of continuity. That is the letter from a wife, from a spouse, from a friend that it can state and will state in a notarized letter and will be willing to be called up in the event to testify, right, in person. And resolve reasonable doubt in favor of the veteran under this 38 CFR. Now, this claim, had it been an ear, nose, throat diagnosis, a family member before service, a, a partner or spouse can show that there have been continuation for a very long time, right? And those are things that must be put in the favor of the veteran under these guidelines here, right? So here's the thing. The VA admits that there are in-service treatment records that show there was rhinitis during service. And they actually conceded elements 2, right? That there was an in-service event. If you remember, 1 is a medical diagnosis, 2 is already the service, right? The in-service event. The third is the nexus. Now, how do you fight this? You get a current diagnosis and you get the nexus. And you should be able to get that from the one doctor. Now, final thing. There are some, if you can't get the nexus from the E, nose, and throat, there are people who will doctors who will do it, but I'm going to encourage you not to pay more than $500 for the nexus letter. All right. I have heard people paying upwards of $2,500 for this nexus letter, and that's a lot of money. All right. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions, comments, hey, listen, this is a good example of a claim that's clogging up the system. I encourage you and all veterans to submit solid claims, have a current medical diagnosis, have an in-service event, and have the nexus. And the nexus should come from the doctor. This is the stronger nexus. If it's a nose issue, get an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Get the doctor who specifically specializes in the issue that you're trying to get a claim for. It is one thing to get a letter from a doctor. Now, you can get nexus letters from all the medical professionals, but to have an undeniable claim, go to the specialist. The specialist can say, there is clear evidence. This veteran has been suffering, in my professional opinion, this veteran has been suffering from this at least 10 or more years. And a specialist can say that. A medical doctor can state that, but if the specialist states it, it's going to just be that much more powerful. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope this has been very helpful for you. And if you, as I mentioned, evidence-based claims, this is an evidence-based claim. Go and check out my next video here and stay strong out there. And remember, submit solid claims. Always solid claims. Thank you for watching.